We're grateful that you're with us tonight. We're live. This is our campaign highlight. We come every single month on the 22nd of the month. So here we are, April 22nd, post resurrection. I'm your host tonight, Reverend Dr. Charlie Haynes Jr., Senior Pastor, BB Memorial Cathedral. And I want to encourage you to make sure that you put people on to this important conversation tonight. This conversation is not only timely, but it is relevant to what we are experiencing, not only in our country, but literally in our world. As you come on tonight, I want you again to make sure that you put your comments in the chat box, whether it's Facebook, whether it is YouTube. You are on all platforms tonight, so we want to encourage you to tell individuals to come on with us. We will start our conversation in approximately like 3 minutes or so. So please make sure you do that. While I wait for you to come on tonight, just make sure you say hello to us. We're looking forward to your comments in the comments section. Just post some, say, hey, what's up, Pastor? Good to see you. I see you, Marina Brown. God bless you. Good evening. Whoever else, please make sure you come on. We have about 25 that's live on Facebook, and that number is climbing. We have some that's about 25 or so that's on YouTube right now as well. As we look forward to the conversation tonight, hey, Sister Effie Ford, God bless you. Pastor Larry Brown, God bless you. Monica Steen, blessings. As we look forward to the conversation tonight, we have some talented phenoms in thought world and leaders among our church. Lindsay Napier Jr., God bless you, sir. Good evening, Sister Toya McQueen. Blessings. Marvin Norman. What up? What up? Devlin Ware Robinson. God bless you, Pastor. Valerie Williams Cole. Thank God for you joining us tonight. Our campaign highlight talk tonight is Black Liberation Theology still relevant? Sister Anita Moore, blessings to you tonight. CJ Thomas. Thank you all for coming on again. Make sure you press them hearts, the thumbs up. Make sure you share it on your page so that people can hear this relevant and important conversation. As we prepare tonight to have this conversation, I want to introduce our panelists tonight. Tonight, I have the Reverend Jerry Christian Jr. Reverend Christian is a graduate of Russ College with a Bachelor's of Science in Social Work. He also has a Master's of Divinity from the Phillips School of Theology at the ITC, and he's currently working on his doctoral degree. So let's call him in. Let's say hello to everybody. Pastor Jerry Christian Jr., blessings.
Hello, Dr. Haynes. Glad to be here. Thankful and honorable and humble for this opportunity. Thank you. God bless you all that's on this broadcast tonight.
Awesome. I like that sweater you got on. I still believe in the Black church. That's amazing. Listen, we got some more guests that's coming on with us tonight. We have the Reverend Khalif Crutcher. He is a graduate of the State University of New York in Fredonia with a bachelor's degree of social work. He's a double master's graduate of my alma mater, Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary. He holds a master's of divinity and a master's of arts in pastoral care and counseling. Come on to the stage. Welcome, Reverend Khalif Crutcher. And if I might say, he is also a resident chaplain with the Advocate Hospital Network. Say hello to everybody.
Greetings, Dr. Haynes, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you on tonight. I'm looking forward to the discussion with the other panelists.
Awesome. And listen, I want you to hear this, sister. She always is impressionable, and she will leave her footprint wherever she goes. She is a graduate of the Colby College, Bachelor's of Art, Indiana University, Bloomington. She has 3 master's degrees. Watch this now. She has an MFA, she has an MA, and then she has an MTS, Master's in Theological Studies from the Emory University. She is a doctoral student at the Vanderbilt Graduate School of Religion. Let's welcome soon-to-be Dr. Amina McIntyre. Let's receive her as she comes and say hello to the community tonight.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Haynes, for the opportunity to be here.
Awesome. And last but definitely not least, he is a preacher par excellence. many respects, I will call him the Howard Thurman of his generation, and that he has the mystique of a Howard Thurman. This is the Reverend Omar Dykes. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from Miles College in Birmingham, Alabama, and a master's of divinity from the Phillips School of Theology at the ITC. He is also a candidate for Masters of Sacred Theology at the Lutheran Theological Seminary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Come on to the stage, Pastor Omar L. Dykes.
God bless you. Thank you, Pastor Haynes, for this time of sharing. Greetings to everyone that is sharing with us, and to everyone that's on the panel. Grace and peace to you all. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Blessings, blessings. We're not going to hold up because it's about 5 minutes in, and I thank God for all of you all who have tuned in. Our numbers have doubled. We're about 62 and keep rising tonight. And I see various pastors on. We shout out to you, Presiding Elder James Dunbar. I see my usher board president on this evening. And yes, this is all in the CME Church, these major phenoms. Sister Teresa Moore McQueen, blessings to you. As we look tonight, I want to open up this conversation with questions to our panelists, but most importantly, dialogue for those who are not familiar with Black liberation theology. Black liberation theology was founded by James Howell Cone, who is a graduate of the Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, also a Northwestern University graduate in the early 70s. He says it is the religion of liberation, a religion that says God created all people to be free. But I realize that for Black people to be free, they must first love their Blackness. He said that in 1969. And then on another side of the world, liberation theology was born out of the movement of Gustavo Gutierrez, which was mainly a part of the Latin American Roman Catholic Church that emphasized liberation from social, political, and economic oppression and anticipation of ultimate salvation. So as we talk tonight, as we throw around maybe a few theological terms in this conversation tonight, I want to open up with, I would suggest the first question here tonight. What is the Black liberation theology, and why you think it is or it is not still relevant? Whoever would like to join into the conversation, please take the mic. All right. If nobody take it, I'm gonna call on somebody. Any, many, mighty, mo. All right. Pastor Dykes, take the mic, sir.
Sure. Thank you, Pastor Haynes, and once again, good evening. Black liberation theology, I believe, is unique. One of the thoughts, just for me at the ground level, for any person to have any thought about God, any word about God, any reference about God, is really doing theology. And I think that Black liberation theology comes from a thought that sees God in relationship with those of the African diaspora, and to the betterment of those who have come from the continent, particularly here in the United States of America, but not just here, for the liberation that we would see ourselves in communion, in fellowship with God, more than 3/5 of a person, that we would see ourselves as a part of God's creation.
Absolutely. And just to switch this to one of our other panelists, let's kind of unpack that a little bit more, because I think you gave us kind of a basis. But let's unpack that a little bit more. And as parsing the word theology, theos, God, the study of God, or our understanding of God. So in that context, how do we see through our lens that we have been made in the image of God? Dr. Amina McIntyre. I like the way that sounds. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm still a student. I'm working on it. So I don't mind waiting my turn to earn it. But I will say, I think there are kind of two things when we're talking about Imago Dei and really thinking about the fact that if we are all made in the image of God, then God is within us, and that God desires for us not to be held captive. God desires for us to have the liberation. And in as much, I think that there is too, and this is the reason why I kind of held off on talking about it at first, because I'm going to have to go here. When we're talking about Black liberation theology, we also have to talk about, not only do we talk about race and talk about people being free in their race, we also have to talk about the complications of what Black liberation and the critiques of Black liberation theology. We have to talk about the fact that Black liberation theology did not even in his writing include women. And when Jacqueline Grant wrote about white women's Jesus, Black women's Christ, white women's Christ, Black women's Jesus,
Right.
talking about womanism and having that particular critique. And then even if you're bringing it even more close now and talking about relevance, and this is kind of where the church has to kind of wrestle some, is that, and we start thinking then not only about where Black women fit into this and where women fit into this, then we have to talk even more and go into the place of Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality. And then also talk about what Black liberation looks like for an entire community. And does it also include gender? Does it also include sex? Does it also include ableism? Does it also include us really working to eradicate poverty? Does it also include us really kind of thinking about not only all kinds of abilities, but also thinking about the mindset of breaking down capitalistic issues and the things that we are, anything that can possibly hold us captive. And so Black liberation theology is, yes, it's to believe in God and believe that God has made us to be free, but also believing that our whole selves have to be free and being able to love on the wholeness of who we are and within our own selves.
Absolutely. I think you really parsed what I was looking for. So I appreciate that. I think it's critical for us to understand that when we talk about these theological worlds, if you will, that it becomes the lens by which we're able to articulate the godness in us. And we use this in that same context, that we realize that in women's theology, that in that particular book that you quoted, is that she used the typology, if you will, or the typecast of how white male patriarchy and feminist movement that did not include Black women, to Black male patriarchy, to the understanding that here it is that which the very thing that undergirds society is the Black woman, and how the blood, if you will, is misinterpreted through those lenses. So if we can just push on that, I'm going to shift to another womanist theologian that's in the form of a male, and the person of the Reverend Khalif Crutcher, to continue that conversation.
Absolutely. And I thank Reverend Amina for bringing that critique in, because it's critical, especially when we talk about Black liberation theology, right? And I like the envelope that Dr. Pamela R. Lighty pushes in her book, Our Lives Matter, talking about a Black queer womanist theology, because not only do we have to critique Black liberation theology, not only do we have to critique the ways in which womanism left out queer bodies, but now we have to bring all of those together and really ask ourselves the question, does the church make room and space for those who are still being pushed on the margins of society, who just so happen to also be melanated, right? And then I think if we want to even push that envelope further, now we have to talk about ableism, right? Everybody stand to your feet, but what happens if somebody cannot physically stand to their feet? And so I think when we talk about Black liberation theology, yes, we have to embrace that we have been given language for the God of the oppressed, but we also have to critique the ways in which Black liberation theology is still being used to oppress kinfolk.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think all of what you have said tonight sets the stage for our conversation. It's in that same way that we see that it was born out of a certain context. Remember, it was 1969. Many were not even a part of the earth yet, but yet it was born out of a system that was already intrinsically oppressed. So I think if we use, especially for our audience, we must understand that because my mind is about to go into theological terms that might not be in lay terms, but we must have to have a hermeneutic of suspicion with everything that we use, by which the lens we're able to have even a hermeneutic in how we see God. So in that same regard, Reverend Christian, can you add your piece to this conversation?
And panelists. Liberty theology teaches us and preaches. Let me say that again, teaches and preaches, because you have to be a teacher and a preacher in the both sense. If you are called a pastor, you teach it and preach it. But it preaches and teaches us hope, freedom, justice, peace, and abundance for all. And one of the things that the Black church has to grapple with and come to face reality with is because we cannot be hypocritical if we're going to face and fight oppression and preach and teach liberation to the outside. We also must teach and preach liberation to the inside. I come under my grandmother, Reverend Christian, who was a woman and one of the first women preachers in the CME Church in Tupelo, Aberdeen district. And she fought oppression. So one of the things that the CME Church has to grapple with is not only the CME Church, but all churches, is the hypocrisy of fighting oppression on the outside, but you are still having prejudice within the inside towards women, towards those that have another sexual identity, towards those that may come from a different background. And so when we recognize that it's a holistic conversion that we need to have to make sure this liberation is construed to the whole of people, inside and out, then we are able to move forward. And it's important that the liberation theology is not just for those on the outside, but on the inside. Because when you're doing with the inside, you can deal with the outside. Yeah. You can't just deal with the outside and not deal with the inside. There's a difference between being prejudiced and being racist. Black folks can't be racist, but we can also be prejudiced. We can be prejudiced towards our females. We can be prejudiced towards those that have the same sex gender. We can be prejudiced towards those that may not have the same background as you. And so when we start looking sideways, I know we're educated, but I sometimes use some urban talk. When we start looking sideways at people because they don't come from the same astute background as you, then that creates a sense of oppression within the same place that we are teaching and preaching hope, freedom, justice, peace, and abundance for all. But is it really for all?
So let me push the conversation a little bit. So I really want you all to kind of dive in. Right? This is a statement that Reverend Rose Archer raised. She says, yes, Black liberation theology is still a very academic enterprise, not necessarily accessible to all. Is it or is it not? Why or why not?
Mm-hmm. I don't mind hopping in to start this particular part of the conversation. Unfortunately, I think that all of the theories that we've talked about today, they hope to be they hope to address the community. They hope to do work in the community, but very often we remember where our paychecks are coming from, and so very often we end up starting with our theories and staying and resting on our theories. And not being willing to take the risk. Even in our generation, I want to say that I absolutely think that Black liberation theology is still relevant and should be pushed on, but it should also be translated. I think that often we don't remember too that that David made sure, at least in the Chronicles version, that Solomon had everything that was needed to succeed. And so if James Cone started us with Black liberation theology, if Jacqueline Grant and Pamela Lightsey and all those other, and Gustavo Gutierrez all started us off with those things, then it is also left up to us as a younger generation to pick those things up and to interpret them and to move them forward and to build upon what's there. And if we're not willing to say, hey, look, I have something to fight for with the gifts that I have. Because I'm not James Cone. I'm not any of the persons that I called out. I'm Amina McIntyre, and I'm going to be Amina McIntyre every single day of my life. And I have my certain gifts and graces. And my Black liberation theology may mean that I don't preach from a pulpit. It might mean that I preach in the theaters. It might mean that I go into the streets and I work with the homeless, which is where I do a lot of my ministry. It might mean that I go into places and I have to live it and not say, hey, this is what I'm practicing, saying this is what I'm living right now. And when I write it for my academic friends, I'll say, hey, this is how I theorize and I give my methodologies and all those kinds of things. But when I talk to my friends on the street, it might have to be, hey, you know what? Today, we're just going to make sure that you live. Today, we're going to make sure that you love yourself. We're going to make sure that the community has what it needs. And understanding that both theory and praxis are equally important, and that we have to really be willing to teach. And I mean, because that's why we have clergy and lay. We have people who lead, we have people who work, we have people who do ministry. And I think it's important for us to all understand how the entire whole is supposed to work together, and that we are supposed to continue to build upon those things that we have been given in our own giftings and moving forward.
I so agree. I so agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. And one thing that I think that's missing, that you have kind of exuded into the conversation, is really a creative theology. What is lacked in the last two generations, I would say, generations post James Cone, is the lack of imagination. It's one thing to critique, but it's another thing to reimagine what it could be for the current generation, to make not only the conversation relevant, but to reframe it so that it can be accessible to those who need it the most. Is it not the screams of the street about no justice, no peace? That's liberation theology. Is it not the screams of those Black and brown bodies who are continuously beaten and killed and maimed by those who wear blue unjustly? That's the cry for liberation theology. So I think not only you're right, Reverend McIntyre, but it is the capacity to have an imagination beyond where you are, to speak to not only the now, but speak to the not yet.
Dr.
Yes.
Haynes, if I may, and I want to push back a little bit. I think that in particular, I'm going to use the context of the Black church in a way, however anybody wants to define it. But I think in the Black church, we have folk who are willing to reimagine or be creative, but yet it's the Black church that suppresses or oppresses that creativity or that imagination. It's interesting to me that Black preachers, and particularly Black churches, can preach Black Lives Matter, in the same token preach homosexuality as a sin, and not recognize, or rather I would say dismiss, the Black queer bodies that began the Black Lives Matter movement. So I think we've got to move to a place where the church can embrace imagination, can embrace a reimagining of what Black liberation theology looks like. We can't talk about serving the God of the oppressed while we still are oppressors ourselves.
Right. So in that same context, we have to also be mindful that as we might have one dogma or one perspective, that there's a plethora of perspectives that want to be heard. And I think what you see very clearly in this post-Trump age is that one dogma that has been suppressed has now become overt, and has now become, in many respects, the dog tag lines of conversation by which theology is talked about. So in that same context, here's the next question. How do you deal then with the social critique that the Southern Baptists have given those who are part of their denomination? Because it's still very much, as we recognize our LGBTQIA family members, if you will, there's still a very much in this country an issue around white and around Black. And until we deal with the base of how this country was baked into racism and formulated as itself to be, quote unquote, the United States of America, we still have to look at all of what we are that makes us who we are. So let's deal with that question around social critique. Anybody can jump in if you're familiar with that. If not, I can move to the next question.
Well, I think at the very sort of basic or foundational level on where we are is understanding that we have to deconstruct whiteness from our theological lens. In other words, what I mean by that is historically, Black folk were force-fed, if you will, a theology that centered whiteness, right? We talk about a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. I think it's up to us to continue to, yes, recognize all these other areas that we need to critique and deconstruct and reconstruct. But I think at the very tip of all of this is understanding that we have to deconstruct white supremacy or white supremacist thought in our theological conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and can I chime in, Dr.
Sure, go ahead.
Haynes?
Go ahead.
I agree with my brother. And one of the things that if we really want to make Black theologians and Black theology liberation relevant, we have to really look at the truth shall set you free. And one of the things why I say the truth shall set you free, I know Jesus said the truth shall set you free. And many times we go into the white Christianity where we just look at resurrection and Jesus said, no, the truth will set you free by us understanding who Jesus really was. What this Christianity that Jesus, this movement that Jesus was really doing. And understand within our own being that this movement and liberation is more about economic, social, political, village. We coming beyond where we were and understanding that we've been taught this picture. A picture paint 1,000 words. So when you saying a blue-eyed Jesus, when you saying a blonde hair that you know don't exist, but they could say, and many of our own people would say, well, it doesn't matter whether you're Black or white. We're all going that. So when you start thinking in that term, you have lost the relevance and the radical and revolutionary of the Jesus, the Christ that I know, that came to say, I came to set the people free, that you might have truth, you might have freedom, have it more abundantly, so that we may get up above our circumstances, because this movement is beyond where we are, but moving us into another perspective that we understand that this truth sets you free. Well, if it doesn't matter, then let's everybody tell the truth then. Right. Jesus wasn't blue-eyed. Moses wasn't blue-eyed and Charleston Heston. Cleopatra wasn't Elizabeth Taylor. So let's tell the truth. The truth shall set you free. And once we understand that, you have a different perspective in what you're looking at instead of Disneyland of the Bible and the scripture and the Christianity, which have been poured on you through the slave master. Why would I want to believe the slave master's history when I should know the history for myself? Study and show thyself approved. That don't mean just reading the scripture. You need to go beyond that, because the scriptures are hidden secrets to where we are to get the freedom of the passage that God has for us.
Right. And I thank you for your articulation of that. I think the reality is that our theology informs our Christology. So if your theology is jacked, it's very difficult for you to have a healthy Christology. I'm in a series of preaching, and one of the issues is that we need in this country a sanitized Jesus, because it speaks to the domestication of the church. It doesn't deal with the radical movement of the political uprisings that Jesus spoke for. So if we, again, our hermeneutic of suspicion have to look at the text. I remember, and I see one of Dr. Haynes's members on from Friendship West, but he says, proof texting without context always lead to pretext, and it leaves us jacked up. So the reality is that we have to speak truth to power, but we must have a lens that gives us a hermeneutic that opens up the door for us to talk. This brother put this in the comment. It's been bothering me, so I want to just say it for tonight, and that's going to move into our next question, because we're already 30 minutes in and we ain't got good warmed up yet. He says it's difficult to reimagine a new church while the older generation continue to push their old progressive ways, which is an oxymoron to me. They're no longer relevant to the times we're currently living in. I appreciate the statement, brother. I think the reality is that all of these thought leaders are active in their churches right now. And the last time I checked, none of them, I'm the only one that got gray hair on this screen. So the reality is that, they're active in ministry. What we have to do in order to change the paradigm, you got to change the culture. In order to change the culture, you got to change the theology. If you don't change the theology, you can't change the culture. If you can't change the culture, you won't change the paradigm. So I think that's the conversation. So is social justice biblical? All right. Just a question. Throw it out there for conversation.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And why so?
Well, I think that when we look at social justice, the ministry of Jesus, definitely, and others in the biblical text, we see example that, there is this ministry, this teaching, these acts that redescribe the world, these acts that tend to go against the systems that are, those religious systems, those oppressive systems, and Jesus builds this relationship with people in helping the religious groups, the Pharisees, come to an understanding that, yes, the kingdom of God is not just looking at the soul, but the kingdom of God is also concerned about the body. And for social justice in the Black church, and I also think that when we look at it, it's not just for, social justice, yes, it's biblical, but it's not just for people in the Bible, and it's not just for people in the church, that it is for people.
Right. So, yes, that's the kingdom, Basileia. It's for the people of God, the reign of God. Come on, Reverend Amina. I feel you in my spirit. You want to say something?
I mean, I absolutely agree that social justice is biblical. I mean, I think about the woman with the issue of blood, and what that we often talk about the healing that took place, but we often overlook the fact that of her reinstatement back into a society that had ostracized her and had turned her out, because for a woman to bleed was considered unholy, and they would have to make a sacrifice. But when they had, what is, I think it's like 2 turtle doves when you're off, when your bleeding stops. And so for her to,
Right.
for 12 years to never have that, she had been so ostracized and probably homeless and considered to be unclean, and placed in a position where she was probably one of the most invisible persons that you can think of. And so Christ recognizing her and healing her is more than just the physical healing that she received, but also the healing for the social. And so there's so many different opportunities, even in the Bible, in the Old and New Testament, that actually kind of speak to that kind of moving against that particular thing. That was why even in the Old Testament, why the kings always had a prophet, because there had to be a balance of what was going on in the leadership. And I do think that, and you said something, and I'm gonna push on you just a little bit, but you said something about the fact that we have to kind of take care of one kind of oppression first before we move into others. And I kind of don't believe that, because I feel like if I bring my whole self and I have things that are going on, you have to be able to also say, hey, while we might all be fighting for the same things, but yes, we still have to address similar things in it. I don't believe in oppression Olympics. I think that everybody should be able to come to the table, and it just might mean that it's not your work, but it might be my work, but
Right.
to recognize that all of our work is the same. And I do think that's part of the social justice in the Bible element, is that understanding that all, like, while it may not be your work, it might be the community's work. It might be, okay, well, Christ heals, but the community is supposed to take the bandages off of Lazarus and to kind of unbind him for what's going on. It has to be that kind of thing. And so there are plenty of biblical examples of what social justice looks like, but we also have to be willing to read the Bible as it is and not make our own interpretation based off of civil religion, because it's very easy to get caught up in what civil religion says and what society says should happen, or kind of what it is that we have in our as embedded because we learned it as our culture, because it's hard to stand up against the people that you know and love and tell them that what they believe may not be right. But we have to be able to and be willing to hold ourselves accountable, even if we don't get that accountability perfect. But accountability is absolutely important. And I think social justice in the Bible is for holding people accountable.
Absolutely. Let me respond to a couple of quick things. And your pushback is basically taken because what my point was that if we hit the source, which is the oppression, so it covers the multitude of sin, if you will, whether it be classism, genderism, sexism, whether it be your color, your race, whatever it is, if we hit the core of what the issue is, then from that, the trickles, if you will, or the foundation will be shaken from that response. I'm looking at this chat. I see my classmate, Pastor Julio Anduo, raises a question: how might womanist theology may fit our context better than Black theology? And I think he would know that question so well. Wish he was on to answer it, because Kelly Brown Douglas has a great response to that question. And I don't want to raise it because I want to facilitate tonight more than answer. That same context, let me just give one biblical example. I just preached it this past Sunday, which is social justice, and that Jesus literally chased out all of the money changers. He turned over the tables, and then he ran the rest out. And then the next verse says, the blind, the lame came in and was healed. If you know anything about rabbinical law, is that if you're blind, if you're disfigured, if you're lame, you can't enter into the courts of the Gentiles. You can't enter into the house of God, and let alone children. But here, the text sets up a social justice narrative that once he cleaned out the things that was oppressing people, because they were double taxing people for the sacrificial lambs and the turtle doves. Once that was cleared out the temple, he declared what the house was: my house shall be a house of prayer. Then the text says the people who needed God came into the temple and was healed. So I think it's critical that we have good biblical hermeneutics to set us up for opportunity. Let's deal with Pastor Julio Anduo's question: how might womanist theology may fit our context better than Black theology? I'll set it up. Womanist theology is relationality. I'm just throwing it out there, so whoever want to take the bite, you can run with it.
I won't say I feel obligated, but I think I kind of brought it up, so I'll get there. I mean, if you go to Stacey Floyd Thomas's 4 Tenets of Womanism, radical subjectivity, traditional communalism, redemptive self-love, and critical engagement, I will say that I think that they all work in tandem. I think we have to be really careful about putting one over the other. But I do believe, I mean, because I think that there is some relevance in all of the theologies that have come forward, and some of the other ones may not have come forward, some of them may not have had Black theology not necessarily made the way. Womanist theology may not, I mean, well, it would exist, but I think it would kind of exist in a different kind of a way if it wasn't also partially in response to Black theology. But I think that at the end of the day, we have to be able to be willing to say we're going to center Black people as important to this particular conversation. This kind of goes back to Reverend Crutcher's comment about pushing against the white gaze. I think that we have to be careful of saying that even that we're pushing against the white gaze. I think because when you center Black theology, when you center Black women, when you center Black men, when you center Black queer, when you center Black whomever, then you're not pushing them up against another and not comparing them to someone else. And so I think that if we're thinking about how we're going to actually teach people how to love one another, to be able to say, here is an environment where you can critique each other and we can push back and forth with each other and allow wisdom to happen, because even Moses and God got in conversations where they had allowed wisdom to occur, even if they didn't always agree. And I think that if we're talking about being able to say, hey, you know what, you can be your full self in front of a space, and you can, at the end of the day, also just understand, hey, that we are here for the community. And I think that that's a part of how they all kind of work together, because I think that understanding that Black women have to have the opportunity to center themselves. Black men have to have an opportunity to center themselves. Black people as a whole, Black whomever, have to be able to center themselves and see themselves inside of what's there without being penalized for what it is, if that makes some sense. So I don't think that I'm one of those kind of people. I don't necessarily put one against another. I think that they all work together. When you're in a room, you all should be able to kind of pull them all together and say, but also say, that we're not, I mean, because this also happens with Black feminism and womanism. People try to pit the two of them together when they work together quite a bit. And a lot of people feel like they're more on the spectrum between Black feminism and womanism anyway. I think doing the versus model may kind of make some things miss and make it overly competitive when it doesn't have to be.
Absolutely. That's a super great comparison and analogy, the versus model. Womanist theology versus feminist. Khalif, Omar, Dykes, Jerry Christian Jr. Let's jump in. We got about 5 minutes. I want to make sure we do this right. What is one theological thought that you want to leave on the minds of the people who have tuned in tonight, that have raised a varied amount of questions in the chat tonight? What is it? Just one thought. Anybody can start, and then
one theological thought I want to leave is to understand that Black theological liberation is a social justice issue, and we need to look at it more on an impound. I know I don't have a few minutes to look at it from a sense that it is a movement. When you look at Jesus and John the Baptist and Jesus, John asked Jesus' disciples, is Jesus the one, or should I look for another? Should I look for another? Because it wasn't a sense of the resurrection. John is looking at what we're looking at today in this climate. Are you willing to stand up? Are you willing to make a difference? Are you willing to be on the front lines? Are you willing to show not just by your words, but by your actions? And then Jesus goes back and says, go tell John, the lame walk, the cripple walk, the blind see. In other words, Jesus saying, go tell John that the blind see. They understand now that their vote does count. That's why they trying to do voter suppression. They understand now the lame has gotten up and understand we're not going to depend on the EBT card or the stimulus check. If it come, it comes. But if it don't, it don't. We're not going to depend on that because we understand our black dollar makes a difference. This God we serve, if we put it together, it makes a difference. We can make an impact on society. We can make an impact on our children's lives. Go tell them the movement ain't dead. And so when you look at that, you understand that Jesus and John's never got together, just like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. But here we are today, still living and breathing. So I leave with us, what are we going to do to continue the Black liberation of James Cone and others within our being to make this world a better place and our churches more?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Appreciate your comments. Very well stated. Pastor Omar Dykes.
Thank you once again for this time of sharing, and thank God for the panelists for sharing also. To the community, one of the things that I hope is that these types of conversations would continue, and that it wouldn't just be in this space. And it is my prayer that as they continue, that we invite other voices to the table and see the importance of Black liberation theology, not in through the lens of what we call sacred spaces, but even secular spaces, that we invite those who have thoughts Because one of the things I believe is that all space is sacred. To think that only those who are in the church can speak about Black liberation theology really limits God. For I believe that says there are parts of God's creation that cannot speak about God and Black liberation theology. So I just wanted to share that we are intentional about having conversations in both sacred and secular spaces. So I pray God's blessings and grace and peace.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Reverend Khalif Crutcher.
As a practitioner who focuses on trauma-informed care, might I suggest to us that we ought to take care of our Black self? And I believe that is a crucial part of Black liberation theology, is making sure that we take care of ourselves as we fight for justice, as we fight for the all that's going on in the world. We need to take care of ourselves. So that's my hope and prayer for us, is that we continue to care for ourselves as we continue to deconstruct these oppressive spaces and reconstruct with imagination a world that God would be proud of, and a space that God is moving in. Be well, everybody.
Absolutely. And here we are, Reverend Amina McIntyre. Your thought.
Yeah, I would only I would echo what my fellow panelists have said, but I would also add to make space for people's narratives and trust them when they say that something has occurred. I think very often we tell people that they're safe enough to say something, but then or safe enough to share their truth and how they need to fight, but then we don't believe them or try to help them out. And also, too, I think that we need to kind of really be willing to say, hey, here's an action plan. This is a way we can do it, knowing that none of us is perfect and that all of us will fall short in the process, but that we won't penalize people who are actively trying wholeheartedly to move things forward and to actually have these conversations. And I think that this conversation maybe even just be I think this conversation is just kind of a launching point. There's so many others that can be had, even as we see in the chat going forward. But be well, everyone.
Absolutely. And that's a great place to park. I want you all to come back in a few seconds to share your social media. But you're right. There's a whole bunch of conversations going on in the chat that could be literally campaign highlights for months to come. And I appreciate you all who have added to the conversation. All of what you have shared is not taken lightly. We appreciate you expressing yourself and being vulnerable enough to share your viewpoints. We're grateful and thankful for these panelists who have taken out their own personal time to share with us this evening in this context, using their lenses to articulate. We give God praise for the Reverend Jerry Christian Jr. We give God praise for the Reverend Khalif Crutcher. We give God praise for the Reverend Omar L. Dykes. And we give God praise for the Reverend Amina McIntyre. If you can, I want you to make sure you give your social media sites tonight where people can follow you, catch up with you, check in on you, see what you're doing in your lives. I want to encourage you to follow me on Dr. Haynes 1. That's on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. For those who would like to support our campaign, go to the website, haynesforbishop.com, and you'll find more information. I'm grateful and thankful for this great panel. Please, let's start with ladies first. Reverend Amina McIntyre, tell us, what is your social media handles?
Okay, my social media handle everywhere is at Lady Loves Her Pen. So Facebook, Instagram, all of it, Lady Loves Her Pen. Cash App, all of it. It's the same everywhere you go.
All right, you could drop that Cash App too. All right. All right. Reverend Jerry Christian, where can we find you on social media land, sir?
You can find me at Jerry Christian Jr. on Facebook, Christian.Jerry69 at yahoo.com. U-Turn Ministry, that's U-Turn Ministry, Reverend Jerry Christian.
That's what's up. All right. Reverend Khalif Crutcher.
You can find me on Facebook by just searching my name, Khalif Crutcher. You can also follow the church, New Hope Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, the Church of Hope on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter, Khalif_Crutcher.
All right. Omar L. Dykes, preacher.
You can find me on Facebook, Omar Dykes, and then also on Greenwood CME Church. On Instagram, you can find me at Thinking Preacher, and you can also find me at oldykes1@gmail.com.
All right, all right. Now, I hope all of you all got that. In the future, I'm going to encourage all of them to be like Reverend Amina McIntyre and myself, get one handle so they can find you wherever you are, unless you're trying to hide. But thank God for each and every one of you all. Bless you. This has been an amazing conversation, and we look forward to next month. May 22nd is our next conversation. You'll see more information on social media about it. But bless God for each and every one of you. And I pray that all of you all have a wonderful weekend. And in the words of the Reverend Jerry Christian's sweater, I still believe in the Black church. Peace. God bless you all.